Famed American social psychologist Leon Festinger wrote a book in the 1950s called When Prophecy Fails. This book is based on his experiences in observing a doomsday cult that predicted that the world is going to end very, very soon. So in the end of 1954, everybody in that cult sold off all their belongings, quit all their jobs, because their leaders said that the world was going to end in the end of 1954. They all gathered up at the top of this hill, waited for a flying saucer to descend from the heavens and bring them all to salvation from the oncoming floods that would engulf the entire planet, essentially. Well, we're all still here today, so obviously that prophecy didn't come to pass. And the thing is, when stuff like this happens, most people would think that, oh, that means that everybody just left the religion, right? But Festinger noted, because he continued to observe them after that they actually continued to remain in religion, and instead they doubled down. Instead of saying that this religion is fake, that the leader was wrong, they actually looked at each other and said that it is because of our fervent zeal, our sort of like support for this religion, our belief, that's why we managed to stop the apocalypse from happening. So for the next few months, they spent their time telling everybody that they were responsible for saving the world, essentially. So that was really what they were doing. So that's what they ended up doing. Festinger later on would use this case study as the basis to create or to propose the very popular social psychology theory, cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is a condition whereby if you encounter a kind of information that undermines or severely contradicts something that you hold very dear to yourself, something like a value system or something that represents you, like a religion, of course, it is very natural for people to try to reject that information or try to twist that information in a way that makes it seem that their core beliefs remain exactly the same. Because if all of these things are so drastic, and most people would rather not want to deal with the repercussions of that. And that's in order to sort of reduce the dissonance from this new conflicting information. Now, conversely, it also happens the other way around, meaning that if you encounter information that supports your worldviews, you automatically assume that it's correct, it's great, and you accept it without interrogating it as well, meaning that this thing is exactly what I believe it to be true, so there's no point in me checking to see whether this is real or not, okay? So why is this important when you're thinking about media and sort of like truths? And it's everything really. We're now in the social media information environment where our access to information is largely influenced by your social media networks. And before we get into that, it's important to understand why this is so different compared to what it was before. Previously, in the world of traditional media, people's access to the latest news and information was very, very limited. You pretty much had access to the three traditional media kinds: newspapers, radio, and television, essentially, okay? And for the most part, if you were, whichever country you were in, a lot of these local news services were quite biased in a certain way towards the state and whatnot. But what came out of this was that there was a series of newswire organizations that were quite international in nature, organizations that still exist today, like Reuters, the Associated Press, and AFP, and they have crafted out this very themselves as credible international news organizations that focus on producing accurate, fair, and sort of like objective news that everybody uses as well. And this is important because they created a shared truths environment whereby if you were going to engage in political discussion with someone, and I don't know how much of you have actually tried to debate politics with someone, it's not something that's very easily done because fundamentally most political ideologies are in opposition with others. And so it can be quite difficult to find common ground. But the shared truths environment did serve to be a space in which, yes, we can disagree on a lot of things regarding the politics, but there are certain parts about what we're experiencing in everyday life that we can all agree to be real. That is going to be based on what we're seeing from these news organizations. So that serves as a way to create a very conducive kind of political discourse environment. The problem, of course, now that in the social media environment, that no longer exists. Because social media, everything everything that you understand, everything you have access to is largely curated based on the algorithm from these services and also filters. So algorithms, of course, I think most people are familiar with, is the ways in which these platforms decide what to show you and what not to show you, essentially, right? But the thing is, people themselves have also been trained to make use of filters, meaning that if I like this content, I'm going to like, subscribe, follow, reshare and whatnot, and that tells the algorithm that, oh, I'm going to give you more content that's similar to this. And for anything that you don't like, you can block it, you can remove it, you can tell the algorithm, like, please show me less of these things, and they'll do that as well. And this has created an environment where social media users basically are trained to be very discerning with what they want to experience in terms of their content. And that's actually a great system. You should be discerning. You should have that control and agency over what you want to consume, because it's entertainment. Feel free to do that. It's really the first time in history that people have that power as well. The problem, of course, is that when this is applied to political information, because when entertainment, all of it just largely exists on its own, political information, it is imperative that you be given access to all political ideologies or informations in as most balanced form as well, in order to ensure that you are not led astray. Because the idea here is that for you to sort of like determine what is the political ideology that should represent yourself and your values, you can only reach those conclusions if you actually get exposure to as many different political ideologies as possible. And unless you're in, and usually in social media, that may not always be the case, because of the way in which we curate and sort of like control our feeds, what I experience in my social media feed will be very different from yours. And when it comes to political information, that is very, very devastating, because it means that certain groups of people, depending on how their feeds have been feeding them political information in one way or another, may lead them to certain political ideologies that may not necessarily be the best fit for them, but it just so happened to be the one that the system pushed in their direction, essentially, okay? And over time, this builds this environment where all the political information will be based along a certain kind of ideology that they believe matches yours. And this is why we arrive at what is known as echo chambers. Echo chambers, I think that's a term that most people understand right now, is when the social media feed, your social media algorithms have decided that, oh, you seem to identify as a person from this particular political stance, essentially. So we're going to start giving you news and information only from this particular sort of like with similar ideologies. We're going to give you experts in the field, content from that field, creators who also make similar notions that support it as well. Over time, this creates an impression towards people that, oh, this is actually a very popular viewpoint, it is all very good. And for people who do have those stances, it often entrenches their beliefs deeper into that particular stance. And at the same time, it completely makes everything outside of your echo chamber to be villainized. It is presented as the other side. It's always seen that, oh, they are not credible, you cannot trust them, they are unreliable as well, because they are opposing to what you believe in most cases. And this is actually very problematic, because echo chambers don't just exist in a vacuum. They are also, this kind of system means that it's also prone to manipulation from political actors through inauthentic behaviors. You know, things like misinformation, fake news, the use of bots and trolls to sort of like just twist your perception of what the world truly is as well. So it's a very, very big problem. And the thing about echo chambers is that echo chambers have been around for a very long time. It was first proposed like over 10 years ago, essentially, and it's one of the few social media theories that has pretty much entered into the public space. You talk to anybody and they sort of can have a rudimentary understanding of what an echo chamber is fundamentally. And the thing is, people, in realizing that echo chambers exist, will try to tell you that, oh, I curate my feed, I control what my access is going to look like, in an attempt to say that they are not going to fall into an echo chamber. So they'll say things like, I'm going to put in certain kinds of news or sort of like creators that are not part of my political viewpoint, just so that I get a balanced view and I remain grounded to a certain degree. And for the most part, that is a good practice. But often, this is often done as a one-off practice in most cases. And if you understand how algorithms work, If you put this thing once, yes, your algorithm will include content from there for a while, but if it notices that you're not interacting with it or you're not doing much with it, it will then push it off to the side over time as well, and you'll still be back in your echo chambers eventually. And that's the problem with this kind of approach, because a lot of people, it gives people a false sense of security to make them think that, oh, you're fine, you're good, you've done all you can, go about your day as usual, which is problematic. So how then do we solve the issue of echo chambers? Okay, one suggestion, which is actually quite popular and something that I advocate personally, is the inculcation of media literacy training skills in people. The idea here is that, yeah, previously you could rely on big traditional media to fact check information to see if it's fake news or misinformation, but these days we as individuals need to do it ourselves. So the media literacy training comprises of a series of checklists that you perform every time you encounter new or suspicious information. So you check who published this, when was this published, do they cite good information, are they providing their evidence, are other sites reporting on the same thing, and can you refer to independent experts to verify this information? A lot of stuff. And the thing is, this is very, very time consuming. It's a lot of work, and most people just can't be bothered to work on it as well. So while if you do give people training with media literacy, that's great, but if you ask them, are you practicing this in the long run? They're probably going to say no, because who has time to fact check everything that comes into their day? If you go back to people from traditional media, if you wanted to figure out what was the most important thing to take note of in the day, all you had to do was sit home and watch the 8 o'clock news and you're done. If in this current media environment, you have to fact check everything, nobody's going to want to do that, and it's not sustainable, okay? And one of the other parts about it that is really quite problematic is that media literacy only works if you are unexposed. The moment you are already in an echo chamber, your entire worldview has already been shifted. Remember earlier I mentioned about how people have to determine, you have to fact check based on what you consider to be reliable media. If you're in an echo chamber, your media ecosystem could be from media that actually is not necessarily reliable, but to you, it seems that they're perfectly fair as well. So you may practice the same steps, but you may still be susceptible to misinformation and fake news as a result of that. So what is the solution that we have here? So what I'm proposing today is really using these two techniques, which I think are good, but we need to think about how they work in the long term, essentially. So I'm proposing what is known as a media diet. And I use the term diet because it's supposed to be similar to a food diet. You know, when you think about a food diet, the idea here is that you have to eat a certain different kinds of food to get the full range of nutrition to make sure that you get a balanced diet, right? The thing is, not all of this food is going to be delicious. Some of them will be quite awful tasting, but you need to make sure you get enough of them so that your body will remain healthy as a result of that. And the thing is, this is an active process that you need to do on a regular basis, or otherwise you're just going to fall sick over time. So similarly with a media diet, you need to make sure that yes, you try to include this sort of like negative kind of different political views into your feed, and you also need to do media literacy practices. But rather than doing it on a daily basis, I propose that you need to do that weekly. Do what I refer to as a periodic self-reflection on your media usage, essentially. So the idea here is that once a week, you're going to take stock about all the stuff that you've looked at, like what news did you consume, what information do you have, and how did it make you feel? Was there any misinformation that you were exposed to? And because of that, do you need to reevaluate what kinds of media you're consuming as a result of that? And then lastly, you need to think also, how has your politics shifted or changed in this last week? Has it moved in the direction that you're not comfortable with, or has it actually changed in a way that you didn't expect but you're happy with it? Because again, political change should happen, but it should be something that you are in control of as well. And so that's sort of like what I'm advocating for, and it's very, very important. And the important part is that this is focusing on long-term running based on that, something that you can practice and hopefully has some longevity to it, of course. And this is important simply because political change is something that happens gradually, and therefore people can often can miss it entirely. And the thing is, people also ask another question. If echo chambers is such a problem, why isn't there any government regulations or policies that are designed to solve this problem? That itself will require a whole other lecture, but yes, it doesn't look like there's any way to solve this at the meantime. But the thing is, not all hope is lost. I like to always go back to the case of Cambridge Analytica. So if you're not familiar, Cambridge Analytica was this data mining firm that worked with Facebook, and using millions of private data that they got from users of Facebook, they sold that data to political entities, and that data was used to manipulate voters in the 2016 American presidential election and the Brexit referendum, essentially. It's widely documented that this took place. Now, before this event happened, social media companies had full access to all your private data. They pretty much could do whatever they wanted. But the moment this scandal broke, all of those doors were closed. We are now living in an environment where private data and social media, we have way more control than we ever did, or we ever thought was possible. Now, you may think that, yes, it's still not great, but it's still a kind of legislation that, if you go back 10 years ago, nobody expected this to ever be a reality. So similarly, going back to this, right now, it is difficult to imagine a world where we can fix the issue of echo chambers with regards to politics. Because again, it's so important. If you are in an echo chamber that has been manipulated in some way, shape, or form, how then are you going to exercise your democratic rights to vote for the right leaders, vote for the right representation, if you are misled in a certain way? So I hope that by adopting something like a media diet, in the meantime, that allows you to ensure that you still retain control. You are not going to be misled by your social media feeds and to ensure that you can participate in politics based on exactly what you want to do and not what political entities are trying to manipulate you in different ways. So until we do get regulation to sort of like fix this problem in the future, this is the best that we can do, and it is the responsible thing that we need to do to ensure that we fight for the politics that we want, essentially. So that's it. Thank you very much.